4 billion years ago, when life was taking its first steps on this planet, half a billion years after the Earth formed, the environment at that time was very different. There were violent volcanic eruptions, thunderstorms, lightning, temperature variations were drastic. During the daytime, it would be, for example, high temperatures. At night, it will be very low temperatures. The concentration of gases in the atmosphere was also changing. So all these changes when they were occurring, life was taking its first steps. As we know, in order to preserve life, we have to maintain homeostasis, which means the internal environment of the cell has to be preserved. We know that there are two activities that are required for life. One, storage of information. Second, the ability to catalyze reactions or enzymatic activity. And we also know that enzymes are sensitive to physical conditions, for example, temperature, pH. So one of the first things cells did is they developed systems which allowed them to sense the environment, which was followed by systems that allowed them to respond to the environmental changes. So the internal environment of the cell was preserved. This was very important for the continuity of life. And this ability of cells sense and adapt to environment allowed life to continue. Cells not only need to sense their environment for changes, but also to find nutrition. They need to be able to find a safe place where they are away from the threats, and also to mate. These are some of the things, some of the reasons why cells need to sense their environment. The second biggest step was going from a single cell organism to a multicellular organism. And it is not that multicellular organisms are clumps of single cells and each cell is existing independent of the other cell. That's not what we mean by multicellular organisms. Multicellular organism or multicellularity means that in an organism is composed of many cells, and some of those cells are specialized in a specific function. Other cells are specialized in a different function. On screen, you can, for example, see a single-celled organism, paramecium, and another organism, a sponge, one of the earliest organisms which was formed. This organism has specialized cells that allow this other cells to support the function, and they have a supporting function, giving this organism a specific shape. They are the skeletal cells. Other cells are specialized in feeding. They have ability to sense food and capture it. So there is specialization in multicellular organisms for the overall benefit of the whole organism. There also needs to be coordination between the cells. So cells have to figure out, for example, if there is a specific nutrient required, cells that are storing that particular nutrient are informed that they need to release it so the other cells can benefit from it. So this step from going from a single-celled organism to a multicellular organism took 2.5 billion years, whereas formation of the first life form on this planet took only 500 million years after the Earth had formed. So it is not just that signaling is for single-celled organism. Multicellular organisms rely heavily on it. Some of the necessary functions that signaling systems provide is, as I've mentioned earlier, in order to survive, for example, an organism which can sense its environment, it is becoming adverse for itself, it has to move. There has to be coordination. For example, when a person is running, the blood sugar is being metabolized and the level of glucose is decreasing in the blood. So there has to be a system that tells cells that are storing glucose in the form of glycogen in the liver cells, that information has to be conveyed to the liver cells to break up glycogen and release glucose. So this is the type of coordination I'm talking about. Additionally, for example, during development, when we have mentioned that life starts from a single-celled organism, when these cells start to divide, they not only are increased in numbers, their number is not just increasing, these cells have to find their specialized function also. So for example, some cells will become kidney cells. They will differentiate into kidney cells. Some will differentiate into heart cells, muscle cells, liver cells, brain cells. And we know all these cells are very important for the overall benefit of the organism, to making sure that organism survives and is compatible with life. So this is some of the things that are responsible, the signaling system allows organisms to do. Now I would like to briefly mention that generally we think of signals as molecules that are released in the body, or we can sense them in the environment. It is not just the molecules that are the signals. You are able to see me because a photon of light is hitting your eye. And that photon is basically the signaling entity, which is allowing your cells to when they detect that photon or the light particle, it causes certain changes that allows your brain to form a picture. We will talk about that in more detail, how you are able to see me in one of the subsequent modules. Temperature, for example, is not a molecule or a particle, signaling particle, but we can sense temperature as well. Similarly, there are organisms that can sense the magnetic field of this planet. For example, the birds, we know that they're migratory birds. They fly to a specific location every summer or winter. So how do these birds know which way to go? So they certainly don't have a map or GPS. They can sense the magnetic field of this planet, and they can charter a route using that magnetic field. Also, some bacteria can sense this magnetic field, and they can also line up, just like needle of a compass. They can detect the magnetic field and they can line up on the poles. So we have just talked about some of the things, why the signaling is important. Next, we will talk about how the signaling systems evolved.